This is the Garden of English. I'm Tim Freitas, and today we're going to talk about how to identify rhetorical choices without actually always using rhetorical terms that we use in English class. So if you want to find out about that, stay tuned. All right, welcome. So I am still Tim Freitas, but today we are actually, if you haven't watched our AP Lit video, that is, we are actually pulling back the veil a little bit because you've always seen my face as the Garden of English, but it's not just my face, it's also this guy's face. This is Scott Diesenhaus. He is my former high school teacher. Our lights just went out, but you know what? The show must go on. He is my former high school English teacher when I was a senior, and he is an integral part of the Garden of English in terms of developing materials. I have him test things out with his kids all the time, and he comes back to me with even better ideas, and we put it together, and that's how we worked. We used to work together. Now we don't, but that's why we do things like this.
Happy to be here.
I appreciate that. So anyway, what we're going to do today is this. We're going to actually talk about choosing how we can label rhetorical choices, but how we can do it specifically. And in order to do that, though, we need to know what rhetorical choices are. So, Scott, this is where you come in.
A rhetorical choice is anything a writer does to convey his or her ideas.
Okay, wait a second. So a rhetorical choice and a rhetorical device are the same thing?
No, a rhetorical device would be anything the author uses to convey his or her ideas.
All right, so when I write about rhetorical choices, do I ever want to use the word use?
I would try to avoid it.
I agree.
How about we look at our method of development and consider effective verbs that actually demonstrate what the writer is doing.
Much better idea. Much better idea. And that's what we're going to do. We have this cool poster for verbs for rhetorical analysis that can help you actually say what the writer is doing. All right, so anyway, here's the deal. So we're going to talk about how do we actually pick out rhetorical choices, and we're going to use the George W. Bush post 9/11 speech to do that. So that is linked right down to the bottom to the PDF. I'm going to encourage you to at least read the first paragraph of that, because that's what we're going to actually use. You can read the whole thing. You're probably going to study it in your class anyway. But we're going to shrink up. And right before I do, I'm going to have you all pause the video. When you pause the video, read that, and then we'll go over some things that we noticed and how we're going to label those rhetorical choices. So I suggest that you pause now. All right, so we're going to assume that you paused, even though you most likely didn't. Or maybe you're just familiar with the piece. I am going to shrink us down because, well, nobody wants to look at our ugly faces anyway.
That's for sure. Except their wives.
That's right.
And that might be iffy.
I know, my poor wife. I say that every single day. But nonetheless, we've got our text. I know, you're absolutely right, she does. We've got our text up here, and we've marked a couple things here that we think kids would typically point out as rhetorical choices. So, Scott, why don't you actually talk about, how kids would probably label this first one if they saw it and they had to label a rhetorical choice?
Well, I think, first of all, a lot of students tend to, rather than looking at rhetorical choices, want to label the device that they're seeing. And the device that's clearly here, at least in the first two sentences, is parallel structure.
Right.
However, the speech uses parallel structure in a lot of different places.
So if I'm writing about this and I want to write a topic sentence and I say, all right, George W. Bush uses parallel structure, period, for my topic sentence, what's my problem with that?
Well, you're not conveying your why. What's the purpose?
Okay, but, right, so I don't know why.
It's also very vague.
Right,
Yeah.
because think about this, if this first sentence conveys parallel structure, the second one would too, because it says secretaries, businessmen and women,
Right.
military and federal workers. So if I just say he uses parallel structure, there's no meaning tied there, there's no purpose.
You're not demonstrating a clear and effective understanding of the text,
Right.
which is what we're looking for as
Right.
a reader.
And you're also, not pointing to the text that you're going to use in your paragraph anyway. So what is a better word that I could use? Let's say we're going to talk about our way of life. I'm sorry, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom. What's a better verb I could use instead of use as parallel structure?
Repetition.
Okay, well, that would be a noun, so we got to turn that into a verb.
Oh, repeats.
Right, of course, right? So how are we going to do this then, right? So George W. Bush repeats. How can I label this rhetorical choice?
So I think very simply, if you're not sure what terms to use, like collective pronouns are not in your vocabulary, simply repeats the word our.
So you're telling me that I could start my paper, George W. Bush repeats the word our.
Absolutely.
Period? I could put a period right there?
No.
No.
Of course not.
Because there's no abstraction.
Yes.
Right. But we can start with George W. Bush repeats the word our.
Yes.
Now, let's say that I don't want to just put my textual evidence in my topic sentence, though. What could I say instead?
Again, collective pronouns, I think, works pretty effectively here.
Okay. So I can't say that there's a rhetorical device because that's a lit term, like one of those literary grammar terms that we know, pronouns. And they're meant to, they're collective pronouns. They're not singular pronouns. So instead of saying uses parallel structure, which points us to like anywhere in this text, we can say he repeats collective pronouns at the beginning of the piece, and then I write in order to, and what do those collective pronouns do?
Well, they're looking to unify the audience, to demonstrate that there's a unified grief.
Right.
To understand that they've all undergone this particular tragedy.
Right, and so the word our does that. So now instead of saying he just uses parallel structure, period, we have he repeats communal pronouns in order to unify the audience in their grief from what happened that morning.
You got it.
That is a much better, much more specific choice and movement in the paper, absolutely. And it also directs you to what you're going to write about for your textual evidence later. It's going to be where the hours show up.
Right.
And then it's going to connect that to how do these hours now connect to grief?
Yeah.
It works perfectly. Cool. So now if we were to think about the rest of this paragraph where it talks about the moms and dads being victims and the friends and neighbors, and it talks about the fires building and the planes flying into buildings. The fires burning and the planes flying into buildings. What are some of the common terms that you think kids would want to use there, and then how do we change that up?
Well, when we especially are looking at things like victims and fires burning, I think kids are very attracted to that ubiquitous word, diction.
That's right.
So we have negative diction.
So we're going to say George W. Bush uses negative diction.
Yes, that's the way to go.
I'm hoping that's sarcasm.
It is.
I know. So, all right. So we want to get away from negative diction because there's plenty of negative diction in the speech. And if we just say George W. Bush uses negative diction, it's not going to help us at all. We want to point to this particular area. So how are we going to deal with that?
Well, when we look specifically at what George Bush is actually saying, let's look at the language.
So what can I do for a verb right up here where we have secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors?
Again, we want to make this as concrete as possible. When we look at our verb, what is he doing? The author is listing.
Cool. Yeah. And so he's listing the victims of 9/11.
Yes.
So I can actually write, he then shifts to listing the victims of 9/11 in order to, and then finish that sentence.
Yeah.
And that's a rhetorical choice. Even though I didn't say any term that I was taught in my English class.
Yeah, you're clearly demonstrating an understanding of what you see in the text and its effect.
Right. Super cool, right? So a lot of times kids are going to want to say things like uses negative diction or uses charged language or something like that. But we're actually suggesting that you get kids to recognize what the author's actually doing and by putting a nice verb in there.
Yeah, for some reason, a lot of students feel that like having a fancy term is more impressive than demonstrating a clear and effective connection.
Right.
And we, as teachers, understand that it's that thought process that's demonstrated through the concrete and the abstract connections that they make that, really demonstrates understanding.
Right. And so the other thing, too, here, folks, is this, that a lot of times kids want to jump to the abstraction as the choice and not the actual choice itself. And the way that you know that you've labeled a rhetorical choice accurately is because if you read it to somebody else who's not you, they will be drawn to the specific text that you would have chose. Yes. If you were to say to somebody, can you show me where George W. Bush repeats communal pronouns in order to unite the people in their grief? When people read this speech, they're only going to go up here and maybe a little bit right down here. Yeah. But the effect of the communal pronouns down here are the same. So it's okay that they have a couple different areas in the text, but they're going to be able to concretely make it there.
And we can clarify by saying initially
in
the opening.
Right. Yes. Some sort of chronological term there, right? So when we have lists the victims of the tragedy, kids are only going to be drawn there. But sometimes kids want to start by saying, so the choice is it getting people angry? No. That's the abstraction. That comes after the words in order to in a topic sentence. He does what to get people angry? So let's actually look at that right here. We've got this part where he talks about the airplanes flying into buildings and the fires burning. And we have the mass murder intending to frighten our nation. And here he's trying to get people angry. So the kids are right in identifying that, but that's the effect. How do I actually look at what's going on here and then label this as a rhetorical choice? How do I get people to look at where it says suddenly ended by evil, fires burning, the huge structures collapsing, right? I mean, these were all things that happened earlier in the day. So what kind of verb can I pull that will help us say, hey, let's look into the past?
Well, why don't we look at what he's doing on our rhetorical verb list here?
I wonder if there is a rhetorical verb up here for that, to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, quite simply, he's describing. It's through that very specific negative diction or descriptive language that he tries to invoke certain emotional feelings.
Right, particularly the anger here, so we
Right,
want to
yes.
be precise about that. So we could say he describes what happens
Yes.
earlier that day.
Right.
What did he do? He describes what happens earlier that day. But somebody else might label that something differently. Someone will be like, well, if it happened earlier and he's recalling it, then he's asking people to remember it, so he's reminding people of that.
Yes.
So someone else could say he reminds people of the terrible situation that they all experienced that morning.
Right, the horrific events that occurred earlier that day.
Right.
Yes.
And-
There's lots of different ways to say it. What we really want to get them to do is look at the text, what's there concretely, and express those ideas as effectively as they can.
Right, and really draw us to the language. Because if someone were to say to you, hey, can you read this speech and tell me where George W. Bush, reminds people of the terrible tragedy that happened that morning,
Yeah.
this is the only area of the text that kids are going to be going to, right here. Or not just kids, any person. Because your choice has so easily articulated that. Now, if a kid actually says, in order to unite people in a righteous anger, well, that's all well and good, but that's so ubiquitous. That's the right effect, but we don't
Yes.
want kids labeling the effect as the choice. We want them to label the choice and then tie it to the effect in the same sentence.
Right, and again, this is demonstrating this abstract thought, this ability to connect the concrete to the abstraction.
And which is important because if rhetoric itself is using language to construct meaning, we've got using what's concrete to convey
Yep.
what's abstract. And if kids put that in their topic sentences the whole time, that will actually help them outline their paper.
Yes.
Right. So he repeats the tragic past events to unite people in their anger. The next step in the paragraph is where are these tragic past events
events.
showing up?
Yeah.
And then our commentary connects that to how does this unite them in their anger?
Right.
And even stem anger in them. So really, folks, that's how it works. But we need to get kids good verbs, not uses, not employs, not utilizes, because they're all the same thing and they all suck, right? But we have this great poster here, which you can pick up on the Garden of English Resources.weebly.com. And this right here is verbs for rhetorical analysis. And this helps kids say, what is the author doing? And when you can identify the patterns of what the author is doing or where they are in their argument, this gives them ways to actually say the author's doing something and not just using the word use or using lit terms or rhetoric
Devices.
terms. Yeah. Like chiasmus. Like, we don't need to actually say that. We could say repeats, opposite sentence structures if we wanted to. Try to turn that into a verb. So when the kids find a metaphor, metaphors compare.
Compare. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Or they contrast. So let's say the author actually compares or the author actually contrasts.
And it demonstrates a deeper understanding of what's happening there to say that there's a comparison going on rather than identifying it as a metaphor.
Right, absolutely. Because when you say the author compares these two things, when the kids extrapolate what those two things are,
Yeah.
that's going to force them to understand it better than just saying, here's a definition of a word because it has like or as in it, so we're going to put simile there,
Right.
right? So anyway, folks, that's really it. Then once again, this is Scott. We'll bring him back every once in a while because, well, I just miss him dearly because we don't work together anymore.
Likewise.
But we do hope that this was helpful for you all in trying to differentiate how do we create rhetorical choices and then how do we, it's okay to identify the effect, but that's not the choice. That's the abstraction, and we're going to try to tie that to the choice itself. So with that being said, Scott, it was great to have you, and I hope you have a
Thanks
great day.
for having me. Take
Awesome.
care.
All right, so once again, we are super grateful that Scott came to join us, came up from behind the curtain to step in front of the camera. We'll have him back on here. We might even start some SAT stuff, who knows. But that'll be well into the future if we even do. But with that being said, the easiest way that you can help the garden grow and support us is by just clicking like and subscribe. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and you can actually support us by picking up some of our rockin' posters about verbs for rhetorical discourse here. This can help you as you try to get rid of using this word right here, uses, employs, or utilizes. On top of that, we do have merch for sale. I'm not sure if you noticed, but if you go and look at Scott's shirt throughout our video, that's actually one of our strongest human argument shirts. So if you thought that was cool, you can go pick one of those up as well. But the last thing that you can do at the end of all of this is absolutely nothing, because these videos are also absolutely free. So keep watching, keep paying attention, like and subscribe, like I said, and you all have a great day.